Listen closely, my children, for the wind in Lagos carries many secrets, but none as heavy as the one born on a rooftop in Lekki. The city lights sparkled like stolen diamonds below, while music throbbed through the floor of the terrace. At a VIP table sat Demi, Femi, and Chidi, men who thought the world was a toy made for their amusement. Between bottles of expensive champagne, Femi pointed a lazy finger across the room. There sat Sola, quiet and still wearing her hospital lanyard. She looked like a dove among peacocks, nursing a simple juice. Femi laughed, mocking her simple phone. Then, a dark idea formed. Chidi bet his Abuja apartment that Demi could not make this serious girl fall in love by Tan's wedding. Demi smirked, watching her. Easy, he whispered, to understand the crime of that bet, you must understand Sola. She was not a girl born with a silver spoon, but one who had carved her own path from the tough streets of Surulere. When her father vanished, Sola watched her mother sew until her eyes grew dim and her back bent like a question mark. Sola did not cry, she studied. She earned a full medical scholarship, choosing textbooks over parties and hospital shifts over sleep. Her heart was a fortress built of sacrifice. Her best friend Amoka often told her that she spent her whole life showing up for others, but no one ever showed up for her. Sola would only smile and return to her work. She did not know that a hunter had just marked her as his prize. Demi did not start his hunt with loud words or flashy gifts. He was a man who knew that a patient cat catches the smartest mouse. He researched Sola's life like a doctor studying a map. He discovered she visited a small, quiet cafe near her hospital every Tuesday morning before her long shift began. He did not rush her table. Instead, he sat nearby, dressed simply, reading a book he knew she would recognize. When Sola accidentally knocked her bag to the floor, Demi moved with practiced grace to pick it up. They exchanged only a few polite words. He did not ask for her name or her number. He simply nodded and left first, leaving his scent in the air. He knew that mystery is the strongest bait. Over the next 3 weeks, Demi moved like a shadow into Sola's world. He did not scroll through social media, instead, he read medical journals so he could speak her language. He returned to the cafe, and this time, the 20 words became 40 minutes. He asked her about her rounds and her patients with a focused attention that most men only gave to a football match. Sola was guarded, like a flower that only opens at night, but she was slowly becoming curious. He walked her to the hospital gate but asked for nothing. Not even a smile. He simply waved and walked away. That night, Demi looked at his phone for a long time before telling his friends that the plan was moving exactly on track. Their first real conversation happened inside Demi's car while they were stuck in the thick, humid crawl of Lagos traffic. For 2 hours, the world outside ceased to exist. Sola spoke about her mother's failing health and the heavy weight of being the eldest child. Demi did not check his phone once. He looked her in the eyes and shared a small, hidden truth about himself, that he hated how much she cared about the opinions of others. Sola looked at him with a new light in her eyes, calling it the most honest thing a man had said to her in years. Demi laughed, but deep inside, he felt a strange, cold shiver. He was starting to see the woman behind the bet, and it made him feel very uncomfortable. As the days passed, Demi began to do things that were never written in the original plan. He began showing up at her hospital at midnight, carrying warm food for her during her grueling double shifts. He remembered the name of her youngest brother and asked about his schoolwork. They sat together on the third mainland bridge at 1 in the morning, watching the black water ripple under the moon. In perfect silence. Demi was no longer just performing a role, the lines between the lie and the truth were starting to fade like mist. Sola, who had spent her life bracing for impact, finally lowered her shoulders and began to trust. She did not know that Femi was watching Demi with a very suspicious and hungry eye. One late-night drive, Sola let the final wall of her heart crumble. She spoke of the years she spent watching her mother struggle, promising herself that she would be the one to fix every broken thing in their family. She confessed that being the strong one was lonely, because everyone assumes you are fine just because you do not complain. Demi gripped the steering wheel, his heart thumping against his ribs. He turned to her and said, "I see you." He meant the words, and Sola felt them like a warm blanket on a cold night. It was the most perfect thing he could have said. But as he drove her home, he realized that the truth was now a monster he could no longer easily hide. The weight of the bet returned when Chidi sent Demi bright, high-resolution photos of the Abuja apartment. The luxury was a reminder of what he stood to gain. The wedding was only 6 weeks away, and his friends were demanding an update. Demi stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the glass. He felt like a man walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. Meanwhile, Sola was in her room, telling Amaka that Demi was different from any man she had ever met. Amaka was worried, warning her that men of his status usually have hidden motives. But Sola only smiled, her heart full of hope. She was planning a future, while Demi was still holding the keys to a lie. Demi took Sola to a quiet, elegant dinner in Victoria Island. There were no flashing lights, just soft music and deep conversation. Sola laughed more that night than she had in years, her face glowing with a happiness that felt permanent. Standing at her apartment gate later that night, Demi looked at her unguarded smile and almost confessed everything. The truth was burning in his throat, ready to come out. He opened his mouth to speak, but his phone suddenly screamed in his pocket. It was Femi, calling at the worst possible moment. The spell was broken. Demi hugged her goodnight and drove away, while Femi's voice on the line reminded him that the wedding was only 3 weeks away. Time was running out. The night everything broke was as quiet as a falling leaf. Sola arrived early for a dinner in Victoria Island with a colleague. She stepped outside to take a private call and heard a familiar, loud laugh nearby. It was Femi, standing by his car, talking loudly on his phone. Sola froze as she heard her own name. She listened, her blood turning to ice, as Femi joked about the bet and how Demi had been stringing her along for months to win an apartment. Then, she heard the faint, crackling voice of Demi on the other end of the line. "Let's just finish it," he said. Sola did not scream. She simply put her phone away, walked back inside, and finished her dinner. Her calm was a terrifying storm. The next morning, Demi arrived at their usual cafe, unaware that the world had ended. Sola was already there, smiling and acting completely normal. She asked about his morning and laughed at his jokes with a warmth that felt real. But it was the calculated performance of a woman who had already packed her heart away. When Demi reached across the table to hold her hand, she allowed it for only 3 seconds before pulling away to sip her tea. As they stood at the door to say goodbye, she looked at him with a strange, haunting intensity. "Take care of yourself, Demi." "Genuinely," she said. He walked away feeling proud, while she watched him go, knowing she would never see his face again. 3 days later, Demi's world began to unravel. He called Sola, but the line was dead. He sent messages, but they remained unread. Panic began to claw at his chest as he drove to her apartment. Her neighbor told him Sola had packed a small bag and vanished 4 days ago without a word. When he rushed to the hospital, the administration confirmed she had taken emergency leave, which had been approved weeks ago. She had planned her exit with the precision of a surgeon. She did not cry or confront him, she simply removed herself from his life like a mistake in a ledger. Demi sat in his car, staring at her empty window, feeling a silence that was louder than any shout. Sola's absence was not just a hole in Demi's life, it was a ripple that moved through the entire city. Without her monthly support, her younger siblings faced a crisis at school. The free clinic in Surulere, where she spent her Saturdays helping the poor, was forced to turn people away because their best doctor was gone. Her mother's medicine cabinet grew empty, and the house felt cold and quiet. None of this was Demi's direct fault, but he realized that by breaking the heart of the woman who held everyone else up, he had broken 100 other lives too. He saw the invisible world Sola had built, and he realized he had destroyed something he could never truly replace. Tan's wedding was a grand affair, but for Demi, it felt like a funeral. Femi and Chidi toasted him, laughing about the Abuja apartment he had technically won. They treated the bet like a grand victory, but the champagne tasted like vinegar in Demi's mouth. He sat at the table, surrounded by beautiful people and loud music, feeling like a ghost. When an old friend asked where Sola was, saying they looked so good together, Demi could not answer. He stepped outside into the cold night air and dialed her number one more time, knowing it would never ring. He stayed outside for the rest of the night, realizing that winning the bet had made him the biggest loser in Lagos. Desperate for answers, Demi went to find Amaka. She did not scream at him, which was far worse. She spoke with a quiet, surgical coldness that cut deeper than any blade. She told him that Sola had spent her entire life being the last person anyone thought to protect. She explained that when Demi showed up with his fake consistency, it wasn't just a romance to Sola, it was the proof she had waited for her whole life that she was finally enough. "You didn't just break her heart," Amaka whispered, her eyes burning with tears. "You proved to her that every fear she ever had about the world was true." Demi asked where she was, and Amaka told him it depended on his heart. Demi did not chase after her immediately, and this was his first act of true love. He realized that he had no right to disturb her peace with his selfish apologies. He stayed in Lagos and began to change. Not for an audience, but for himself. He began paying her siblings' school fees anonymously, ensuring they never missed a class. He sent large, quiet donations to the Surulere clinic, keeping the doors open for the poor. He told Femi and Chidi that he was finished with their shallow games and moved out of their circle. He did not tell anyone what he was doing. A month later, Amaka called him. "She is in Port Harcourt," she said quietly. "She is okay, and you deserve to know." The drive to Port Harcourt was a long, lonely journey of 8 hours. Demi drove in total silence, refusing to play music or take calls. He had no prepared speech and no plan to force her back. He only knew he had to see her. He thought about the night on the bridge and the honest words they had shared in the traffic. He realized that Sola was the only real thing he had ever touched in a life made of shadows and bets. He felt small and unworthy, but he kept driving through the dust and the heat. He arrived at the city in the dead of night and parked outside her new hospital, waiting for the sun to rise on his judgment. As the morning shift ended, Sola walked out of the hospital gates in her blue scrubs. She looked exhausted but steady. She saw Demi's car and stopped walking. She did not run or cry, she simply stood her ground and waited. Demi got out of the car slowly, his heart heavy in his chest. He walked toward her but stopped several feet away, respecting the space between them. "I drove 8 hours," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't have a speech. I just needed you to see me standing here with nothing to offer except the truth of what I did." Sola looked at him for a very long time before telling him to come and eat breakfast. They sat in a small, crowded buka near the hospital. Sola ate her food with a calm appetite, while Demi could barely swallow. She told him clearly that she was not broken and did not need to be rescued. She had moved to Port Harcourt to find out who she was when she wasn't busy being the strong one for everyone else. She told him she had forgiven him, not for his sake, but because she refused to let his darkness live inside her heart. "Forgiveness is not a door that stays open," she said quietly, her eyes locking onto his. Demi nodded, feeling the weight of her strength. He asked if he could show her one thing before he left her forever. Demi placed the papers on the table. He showed her the transfer receipts for her siblings' school fees and the records of the donations to the clinic. He showed her the letter he had written to the medical board, fighting for the volunteer programs she had once dreamed of starting. Sola read every word in silence, her jaw tightening as she realized he had done all of this without telling her or seeking her praise. "You didn't do this to get me back," she noted. Demi shook his head. "I did it because you were right, and the world needed it." Sola folded the papers carefully, looking out the window at the busy street, her heart finally beginning to thaw. Sola told him she would not be returning to Lagos. She had built a new life in Port Harcourt, a fresh start where she was known only for her work and her own spirit. She did not need a man to complete her story, and she certainly did not need the drama of his old life. But she admitted that his actions, his quiet accountability and his change of heart, actually mattered to her. She told him that she had not had enough real things in her life to throw away a man who had truly learned his lesson. "Give me time," she said firmly. "Not a promise, just time." Demi thanked her for the chance and prepared to drive back to his life. In Lagos, the story of the bet finally leaked out into their social circle. It was not a grand explosion, but a quiet, cold shunning. People began to look at Femi and Chidi differently. Women who had once laughed at their jokes now turned away when they entered a room. Business partners grew cold and distant. Realizing that men who would bet on a woman's heart could not be trusted with money or secrets. The power they thought they had began to slip through their fingers like sand. Femi called Demi, complaining that people were acting strange, but Demi only agreed and hung up. He realized that the truth had a way of cleaning the house, whether you liked it or not. Chidi, feeling a rare and heavy weight of guilt, finally contacted Demi about the Abuja apartment. He could no longer stand the sight of the place that had started the tragedy. Together, they made a plan to turn the luxury apartment into a home for female medical students from poor backgrounds who needed a place to stay during their rotations. It was Demi's idea, and he did it without seeking any credit or fame. The deed was transferred quietly, and the apartment became a place of hope instead of a symbol of a bet. Months later, Sola's sister's friend was one of the first to live there, proving that the world is a circle that always meets. 6 months passed, and the silence between Demi and Sola turned into long, late-night phone calls. They spoke of medicine, life, and the lessons they had both learned in the dark. Demi visited her in Port Harcourt, but he never asked for more than she was willing to give. He showed her consistency where there had once been only a performance. He became a man who showed up, not for a bet, but because he finally understood what was worth keeping. One evening, Sola called him and told him she was coming to Lagos for her mother's birthday. Demi felt a surge of hope, but he kept his voice steady. He invited her family and waited for the day to arrive. The final scene took place in a small house in Surulere. Sola arrived at her mother's party and saw Demi sitting with her youngest brother. She stepped outside for air and overheard the boy asking Demi why he had helped them when he didn't have to. Demi's voice was quiet and sincere. "Because your sister showed me what it looks like to be real. And I spent too long taking that for granted. I'm trying to be better." Sola stood in the shadows, breathing slowly. She walked back inside and found him. "Stay for cake," she said softly. He smiled, and as they stood together, the bet was finally dead, replaced by something that the city of Lagos could never destroy.